My name is Alara, and on my 11th birthday, my mother gave me the most expensive lesson of my life, wrapped in a single crumpled $20 bill. I remember the exact weight of it in my palm, light, dry, and terrifyingly small against the backdrop of our 5-car garage. She didn't hug me goodbye. Instead, she adjusted her designer sunglasses, the lenses reflecting a version of me that looked smaller than I felt, and whispered the word that would haunt me for years: independent. "You're not a baby anymore, Alara," she'd said, her voice bright and rehearsed, like a caption on one of her lifestyle posts. 30 days, think of it as a solo retreat. Prove you can handle the legacy we're building. Then came the sound that marked the end of my childhood, the heavy, motorized hiss of the trunk closing on their luggage, followed by the roar of an engine fading into the distance. For the first hour, the house felt like a playground. By the fourth hour, it felt like a museum. By the second day, it felt like a tomb. My parents were influencers of the highest order. They sold a dream of intentional living to millions, yet they had intentionally left their daughter with a refrigerator full of organic kale and a credit card that turned out to be nothing more than a plastic lie. When I tried to order my first meal, a simple pizza to stop the trembling in my hands, the screen flashed red, declined. That was the moment the game stopped. I looked at that $20 bill. In a world of marble countertops and high-speed internet, I was suddenly a scavenger. I realized then that my survival wasn't a glitch in their plan, it was the test. They wanted to see if I was brand compatible, if I could suffer in silence without ruining their aesthetic. But as I opened my blue spiral notebook and wrote the word evidence in jagged, angry letters, I made a silent vow. If they wanted me to be independent, I would be. I would be independent enough to tear their perfect world down, brick by expensive brick. Stay with me until the end, because the way I turned that $20 into a weapon of justice is a story my parents spent thousands of dollars trying to keep you from hearing. The silence following the declined message on the iPad wasn't just a lack of sound. It was a physical pressure, like the house was holding its breath to see if I would shatter. My name is Alara, and by the morning of day 3, I realized that the luxury surrounding me was a hallucination. You can't eat marble, and you can't drink the filtered light reflecting off a designer swimming pool. My stomach had moved past the stage of growling. It was now a dull, persistent ache that made my head spin every time I stood up. I walked to the kitchen, my footsteps echoing on the polished concrete floors. I opened the fridge again, hoping, praying, that I had missed something. But no, just the same jars of expensive, fermented garnishes and the rows of alkaline water that felt like lead in my empty gut. I took the $20 bill from the counter. It felt like the only real thing in the house. I knew I couldn't call a taxi. The card was dead, and I didn't have an app for that, so I walked. Our house was situated in one of those gated communities designed to keep the world at bay, which meant the nearest grocery store was 3 miles away down a road with no sidewalk. The heat was a heavy blanket. By the time I reached the Value Mart at the edge of the suburbs, my vision was flickering at the edges. I walked through the sliding glass doors, and the smell of the rotisserie chickens near the entrance almost brought me to my knees. I had to grip the handle of a shopping cart just to stay upright. I spent an hour in that store, a ghost in a hoodie, doing the kind of grim math no 11-year-old should know. I ignored the snacks. I ignored the colorful boxes of cereal. I went for the heavy, ugly staples. A 5-pound bag of rice, a jar of generic peanut butter, a bag of apples that were on clearance because they were bruised. Total, $14, $32. I stood at the register, clutching my remaining $5. 68 like it was the last of my blood. The walk back was a blur of pain. The bag of rice felt like a boulder, and the plastic straps of the grocery bag dug deep, angry red lines into my palms. When I finally reached the front door and punched in the security code, I didn't even make it to the kitchen. I sat on the foyer floor and ate a bruised apple, core and all, shivering despite the humidity. That night, I didn't go to my bedroom. I felt like if I went upstairs, the house would swallow me. I dragged my bedding into my father's home office. I wanted to be surrounded by the things he loved most: his monitors, his awards, his leather chair, so I could remember exactly who was doing this to me. I opened the blue notebook. Day 3, evidence item 4, the trek. I wrote with a hand that wouldn't stop shaking. Mom and Dad are currently posting photos of a sunrise yoga session in Kyoto. The caption says, "Finding peace in the stillness." Back home, the stillness is just me trying not to throw up from hunger. I bought rice. I have $5, $68 left. If the power goes out, the rice is useless. I wonder if they know that. I picked up my phone and started a recording. I didn't turn on the lights. I let the blue glow of the screen illuminate my face. I looked skeletal, the shadows under my eyes deep and bruised. Day 3, I whispered to the lens. The independent woman is eating plain rice tonight. The junior executive card is a piece of trash. I called the house manager, but he said Mom told him not to come by this month because they wanted me to experience true autonomy. Autonomy is just a fancy word for being forgotten. I paused, listening to the hum of the central air conditioning, the only thing in the house that seemed to care if I was comfortable. I'm not just recording this for me, I said, my voice gaining a cold, sharp edge. I'm recording this for the lawyers. I'm recording this for the followers who think your life is perfect. This is the unboxing video you never wanted the world to see. I saved the file into a cloud drive I'd hidden behind a password. My father had taught me that information is the only real currency. He just didn't realize I was the one who was going to bankrupt him. By day 5, the autonomy turned into a fever dream. The rain started, a massive tropical downpour that turned the pine forest into a wall of gray. The internet flickered and died. The smart home became a dumb, dark box. I sat in the kitchen, staring at the 5 pounds of rice, realizing I had no way to cook it without power. That was when the first true wave of terror hit me. It wasn't just about hunger anymore. It was about the fact that if I slipped in the dark, if I got sick, if I simply stopped breathing, I would stay here for 3 more weeks before anyone even thought to check the locks. I was a secret in a glass box. I grabbed the Sharpie and went to the large, white-painted wall in the hallway, the one my mother had decorated with inspirational quotes about family and light. I pressed the tip of the marker against the pristine surface and wrote, in letters 3 feet high, I am hungry. It felt better than a prayer. It felt like a declaration of war. By the time day 7 bled into day 8, the house had transitioned from a luxury estate into a high-tech psychological experiment. The power had returned after the storm, but the internet remained down, leaving me severed from the digital umbilical cord my parents used to monitor their perfect world. My name is Alara, and on that 8th morning, I stopped waiting for the garage door to open. I stopped listening for the chime of a text message. I had become a creature of the shadows, moving through the hollow rooms with a silence that matched the walls. My diet was down to peanut butter licks and the few apples I had left, the $5. 68 sat on the counter, a pathetic little pile of coins and a $5 bill that felt more like an insult than a lifeline. I found myself standing in front of the massive mirror in the hallway, staring at the girl reflected there. She looked like a stranger, eyes sunken, hair matted, wearing a stained hoodie that smelled like fear and stale air. I walked back to the wall where I had written I am hungry. Underneath it, I added a new line, I am still here. That afternoon, a sudden, sharp rapping echoed through the house. It wasn't the doorbell, it was the back kitchen door. I froze, my heart leaping into my throat. My first instinct was to hide, to crawl under the massive dining table and wait for the intruder to leave. But then I saw a flicker of a yellow raincoat through the glass. It was Mr. Henderson. He was my history teacher, a man known for his obsession with primary sources and his refusal to accept the internet was down as an excuse for late homework. He was holding a stack of graded essays, and he looked confused, peering through the glass into our darkened kitchen. I reached for the handle, my fingers fumbling with the lock. When the door swung open, the smell of the damp earth and the fresh air rushed in, nearly knocking me over. Alara? He said, his voice dropping from a polite inquiry to a sharp, sudden alarm. My God, child, what's happened to you? I didn't answer, I couldn't. I just stood there, swaying slightly, clutching my blue notebook to my chest. He stepped inside, his eyes darting from my gaunt face to the pristine kitchen that looked like it hadn't seen a cooked meal in years. Then, he saw the wall. He saw the black Sharpie letters screaming I am hungry. Where are your parents, Alara? He asked, stepping closer but keeping his hands visible, as if he were approaching a wounded animal. Japan, I whispered. Then Bali, 30 days. 30 days. He repeated, his face turning a deep, angry red. Who is here with you? The house manager? A nanny? Just me, I said. I held up the black credit card. The card didn't work. I had $20. I bought rice, but the power went out. Mr. Henderson didn't say another word. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and dialed 3 numbers. Yes, I need an emergency response at the Carter residence. Gated community, lot 42. I have an 11-year-old female here, victim of extreme neglect. Abandoned. Send an ambulance and the police. Now. He hung up and looked at me, his eyes softening. I came by because you missed 3 days of school, Alara. Your parents didn't answer my emails. I thought maybe you were just sick. I had no idea. I wrote it down, I said, opening the notebook to the page titled Evidence. I didn't want them to say I was lying. They always say I'm dramatic. Mr. Henderson took the notebook. As he read my entries, the 66-cent calculations, the descriptions of the headaches, the unboxing videos I had described, he sat down on one of the expensive bar stools, his hand over his mouth. He was a man who taught history, a man who knew about the dark things people do to each other, but this was happening in the wealthiest zip code in the state. Within 15 minutes, the quiet of our neighborhood was shattered. Sirens wailed, drawing the eyes of the few neighbors who were home. The police didn't just walk in, they entered like a tactical team, led by a woman in a dark suit who introduced herself as Detective Vance. I watched as they moved through the house with cameras and clipboards. They didn't see the intentional living my mother spent hours staging for her followers. They saw the truth. They photographed the empty fridge. They photographed the junior card. They took the Sharpie from the counter as evidence. Maya, sweetheart, Detective Vance said, kneeling in front of me. We're going to take you to the hospital to get you checked out, and then you're going to stay with someone safe. Do you understand? I have more, I said, pulling my phone from my pocket. I have the videos. I have the emails where they told me to be independent and not to call unless the house was on fire. Detective Vance took the phone like it was made of glass. You did the right thing, Alara. You did exactly the right thing. As they led me out to the waiting ambulance, a crowd of neighbors had gathered at the end of the driveway. I saw Mrs. Gable from 3 houses down, her face pale with shock. I saw the flashbulbs of a local news crew that had already picked up the police scanner chatter. I looked back at the house one last time. The lights were all on now, bright and cold, exposing every corner of the lie. My parents were halfway across the world, probably posting a photo of a Zen garden, completely unaware that their little independent woman had just called the world to their doorstep. Wait, I said to the EMT as he helped me onto the stretcher. What is it, honey? Make sure they don't paint over the wall, I said, my voice steady for the first time in a week. I want them to see it when they get back. I want them to know what they did. The doors of the ambulance clicked shut, the sound almost identical to the deadbolt my mother had turned 7 days ago. But this time, I wasn't on the inside. This time, I was the one walking away. The hospital room was too white, too bright, and smelled overwhelmingly of bleach, a stark contrast to the stagnant, expensive scent of my parents' house. My name is Alara, and for the first 48 hours after my rescue, I didn't speak. I just watched the IV drip into my arm, delivering the nutrients my parents had withheld in the name of a spiritual reset. Detective Vance was a constant presence, sitting in the plastic chair by the door. She didn't push me to talk, she just waited, her tablet always open. On the morning of day 10, she finally leaned forward. Alara, the authorities in Japan have made contact with your parents. They were found at a luxury hot spring resort in the mountains. They've been detained. I didn't feel the surge of triumph I expected. Instead, I felt a cold, hollow dread. Are they coming back? They are being extradited, Vance said, her voice professional but laced with an underlying heat. They're facing multiple counts of child endangerment and neglect. But there's something else, Alara. We processed your father's laptop. We found the Operation Freedom folder. I looked at her, my heart skipping a beat. What is Operation Freedom? It was a plan, she said carefully. It wasn't just a 30-day trip. They had already paid a deposit for a residential academy in Switzerland. They were going to fly directly from Bali to Europe, drop you at a boarding school that specializes in behavioral correction, and continue their travels for another 6 months. The month alone in the house. That was a trial run. They wanted to see if you would cause drama or if you would stay quiet. If you had stayed quiet, you wouldn't have seen them again until next year. The betrayal was so deep it felt physical, like a new wound opening up. They hadn't left me to test my maturity. They had left me to see if I was a low-maintenance, enough product to be stored away. I was a luggage they had decided to check into long-term storage. I want to see the messages, I said. The ones where they talked about it. Vance hesitated, then turned the screen toward me. I read the emails between my father and the school's admissions director. Our daughter is quite precocious, but requires a high degree of independence training, my father had written. We want to ensure she can manage her own affairs without interrupting our professional commitments. This month-long solo period will serve as her final assessment. I looked at the date of the email. It was sent the same day my mother had bought me the compass necklace. A gift for a daughter they were planning to lose. The junior card, I whispered. Did he know it wouldn't work? We think so, Vance replied. The logs show he manually lowered the limit to $10 the night before they left. It was a stress test, Alara. He wanted to see if you would break character and call for help. He told the school he wanted a daughter who was self-contained. A strange, frozen calm settled over me. I wasn't crying, I was calculating. My parents had spent their entire lives teaching me that image was everything, that data was power, and that if you didn't control the narrative, someone else would. Well, I was a fast learner. Detective, I said, my voice sounding older than 11. I have more evidence. In my room, under the loose floorboard in my closet, there is a second phone. It's the one my mom retired last year, but she never wiped the cloud account. It's synced to her private messages, the ones she doesn't post on Instagram. Vance's eyes sharpened. What's on that phone, Alara? Everything, I said. The real reasons they needed a break from me. The conversations about how much more money they could make if they didn't have to pay for my private school and tutors. The truth about their perfect marriage. That afternoon, while I was still in the hospital, the local news broke the story of the glass box girl. But I wasn't just a victim anymore. With the help of Sarah, Chloe's aunt, I decided to take the narrative back. We didn't wait for the trial to start. We leaked the first video from my hidden folder. It was the video from day 5, me, sitting in the dark, eating a dry spoonful of peanut butter by the light of a flickering candle. Day 5, the video me said. Mom, Dad, I hope the sushi is good. I'm wondering if $10 is supposed to cover the electric bill too, because the lights just went out. I guess this is what independence feels like. It went viral within 3 hours. The influencers who had spent years curating a life of luxury were being dismantled by a girl with a cracked screen and a hungry stomach. The brands that sponsored my parents began to release statements of condemnation. Their lifestyle empire was collapsing in real time, one like at a time. By the time my parents landed back on American soil, they weren't met with a private car and a quiet ride home. They were met with handcuffs, a swarm of cameras, and a public that wanted their heads. My mother tried to hide behind her sunglasses, but the police made her take them off for the mugshot. She looked haggard, terrified, and for the first time in her life, she didn't have a filter to hide behind. I watched the news from Sarah's living room, a bowl of warm soup in my lap. I wasn't the girl in the glass box anymore. I was the one who had shattered it. Are you ready for the hearing tomorrow? Sarah asked, placing a hand on my shoulder. Yes, I said, but I'm not going there to ask for an apology. I'm going there to deliver the closing statement. I opened my blue notebook to a fresh page. I didn't write about food. I didn't write about the dark. I wrote the words I was going to say to a judge, words that would ensure that even after they got out of prison, they would never, ever be able to call themselves my parents again. The courtroom was a cathedral of judgment, all polished wood and cold marble, echoing with the whispers of people who had come to witness a digital empire fall. My name is Alara, and as I walked to the stand on day 15, I felt like a ghost returning to the scene of a crime. My parents were seated at the defense table. They didn't look like the golden gods of Instagram anymore. My mother's hair was limp, and my father's expensive suit seemed to hang off a frame that had shrunk under the weight of 1,000 headlines. When I took the oath, I didn't look at the judge. I looked straight at my mother. I wanted her to see the eyes of the girl who had survived her stress test. Alara, the prosecutor said softly, tell the court about the night of day 6. It was raining, I said, my voice steady, cutting through the silence of the room. The power was out, and I was sitting on the floor of the pantry, because it was the only place that felt small enough to hide in. I was trying to decide if I should eat the last of the peanut butter or save it for the morning. I realized then that my parents hadn't just forgotten to activate a card. They had intentionally designed a world where I had to choose between being a good, quiet girl and staying alive. My father's lawyer stood up, his voice oily and patronizing. Your Honor, this is a heart-wrenching story, but let's be realistic. This was a parenting experiment gone wrong. A miscommunication about a spending limit. My clients provided a multi-million-dollar roof over her head. Is that really neglect? The judge, a woman with eyes like iron, looked at the lawyer. Counsel, I believe the evidence submitted this morning, the Operation Freedom spreadsheets, speaks to more than just a miscommunication. I watched my father flinch at the mention of the spreadsheets. He had spent years managing data, but he had never expected his own daughter to become the most dangerous variable in his life. I have a final piece of evidence, I said, looking at the judge. It's a recording from the second phone. It's from the night before they left. The courtroom went still as the audio began to play. It was a private conversation between my parents, recorded by a security camera they thought was turned off. She's getting too old for the cute kid content, James. My mother's voice rang out, sharp and cold. The followers are plateauing. If we send her to the academy, we can pivot to the empty nester lifestyle. It's a huge market. The 30 days is just to make sure she won't make a scene when we tell her she's going to Switzerland. If she can survive a month without us, she can survive a year. And the card? My father's voice asked. If she's hungry, she'll learn to be resourceful, my mother replied. Success requires grit, James. We're giving her grit. The recording ended. The silence that followed was visceral. My mother buried her face in her hands, but she wasn't crying for me. She was crying because the mask had been stripped away. She had been caught describing her own child as a plateauing asset. I wasn't a child to you, I said, my voice rising for the first time. I was a brand extension. You didn't give me grit. You gave me a trauma that I will have to carry long after you've served your time. You wanted an empty nest lifestyle. Well, you got it. Your house is empty, your accounts are frozen, and your daughter is gone. The judge's gavel hit the wood like a gunshot. Based on the evidence presented, specifically the premeditated nature of the abandonment and the emotional warfare used against a minor, I am ordering the immediate and permanent termination of parental rights. Furthermore, I am recommending the maximum sentence for child endangerment and financial fraud. As the bailiffs led them away in handcuffs, my father tried to catch my eye. Ilara, we were doing it for your future? He shouted. I didn't blink. I didn't even flinch. I just watched them go. That evening, I sat on the porch of Sarah's house. She brought me a plate of real hot food, not rice, not peanut butter, but something that actually smelled like a home. I pulled out my blue notebook. I turned to the very back, past the hunger log, past the evidence. I wrote, Day 15, the labels have changed. I am no longer a junior executive. I am no longer a little independent woman. I am no longer an asset. For the first time in 11 years, I am just a person. But as I looked at the headlines on my phone, I saw that the story wasn't ending. My parents, empty nester, pivot had become a national scandal, sparking a movement to protect children of influencers. I had accidentally become the face of a revolution. Ilara. Sarah called from the kitchen. There's someone on the phone, a woman named Mrs. Gable. She says she has something that belongs to you, something your parents tried to throw away before they left. I felt a chill. Mrs. Gable, the neighbor who had seen the ambulance. What could she possibly have? She said it's a box of letters, Sarah continued, her brow furrowed. Letters from your grandmother, the ones your mother told you were lost in the move 3 years ago. I stood up, my heart racing. My grandmother, the only person who had ever truly loved me without a camera present. My mother had told me she'd stopped writing before she died. If those letters were real, it meant the gaslighting went back much further than a 30-day trip. It meant my entire life had been a curated lie. Tell her I'm coming, I said. I have one more piece of evidence to collect. The drive to Mrs. Gable's house felt like a journey into a past I had been told no longer existed. My name is Ilara, and for 3 years, I had believed I was a girl with no history, a child whose only roots were the ones my parents planted in the shallow soil of social media. My grandmother, Nana Rose, had been the only person who smelled like real flour and old books, but after we moved into the glass box, my mother told me Nana had grown bitter and stopped calling. When she passed away a year later, I was told there was no inheritance, no letters, nothing but a cold silence. Mrs. Gable was waiting on her porch, a small, weathered woman who looked like the opposite of everything my mother admired. She held a dusty cardboard box as if it were made of porcelain. They put this in the heavy-duty trash bin the night before they left for Japan, Mrs. Gable whispered, her voice trembling with indignation. "I saw your father hauling it out. I've lived next to them for 5 years, Alara. I've seen how they treated you like a prop. I couldn't let them throw this away. I knew if I kept it, one day you'd be free enough to read them." I took the box into my lap. Inside were dozens of envelopes, all addressed to me in Nana Rose's shaky, elegant script. They were postmarked throughout the last 3 years, right up until the month she died. I opened the top one. "My dearest Alara," it read. "I've sent 5 letters this month, but your mother says you're too busy with your training to write back. I'm sending this with a little bit of cash hidden in the lining, just in case. I know how they are with their discipline. Remember, you are not a project. You are a soul." I felt a sob rip through my chest, a sound so raw it scared me. They hadn't just starved my body for 30 days, they had starved my heart for years. They had intercepted every bit of love that tried to reach me, filtering it out so I would be entirely dependent on their approval. The independence, they praised, was just a wall they had built to keep me isolated. I spent the night at Sarah's, sitting on the floor, surrounded by Nana's letters. Each one was a piece of a map leading back to myself. I found out that Nana had left me her small cottage in the mountains, a place my mother had sold behind my back, or so she thought. But as I reached the bottom of the box, I found a legal document. Nana had been smarter than they gave her credit for. She had placed the cottage and her savings into a private trust that could only be accessed if I was emancipated or orphaned. "Sarah," I said, looking up from the papers, my eyes burning. "They didn't just neglect me. They stole my life, this trust. It was supposed to be my safety net 3 years ago. They hid it so they could keep me under their thumb." Sarah sat beside me, reading the documents. "This is mail fraud, Alara, and embezzlement of a minor's trust. This goes beyond child endangerment. This is a federal crime." I realized then that my evidence notebook was only half full. I had been documenting the hunger of the present, but I had missed the theft of my past. My parents weren't just bad at parenting. They were criminals who had viewed their daughter as a financial obstacle to be managed and looted. The next morning, I didn't go back to the hospital. I went back to the police station. Detective Vance looked up as I walked in, Nana's box in my arms. "I have more," I said, my voice as cold as the marble in my father's foyer. "I want to add a new charge to the file." The investigation into the Rose Trust opened a floodgate. It turned out my father had been using my inheritance to fund their lifestyle when their sponsorship deals fell short. Every vacation, every designer dress, every spiritual retreat had been paid for with blood money stolen from a dead woman and her orphaned granddaughter. The public's reaction shifted from pity to a scorching, white-hot rage. My mother's perfect image was now forever linked to the image of her throwing her own mother's letters into a trash bin. I sat in Sarah's garden that evening, watching the fireflies. For the first time, I felt Nana Rose near me. I wasn't just a victim of a 30-day experiment anymore. I was the girl who had reclaimed her heritage. I pulled out my Sharpie and a fresh notebook. On the first page, I didn't write evidence. I wrote the truth. Day 25, I wrote, "The hunger in my stomach is gone, but the hunger for justice is just getting started. They thought they could delete my past, but you can't delete a person. I am my grandmother's granddaughter. I am a survivor of the glass box, and I am finally holding the keys." But then, my phone buzzed with an alert from the jail's automated system. My father had requested an emergency meeting with me. He claimed he had one last secret, something about the night I was born that would change everything. I looked at the screen, a cold wind rustling the leaves. I knew I should say no. I knew I should walk away. But the girl who survived 30 days on 66 cents a day wasn't afraid of secrets anymore. "I'm going," I told Sarah. "I want to see the look in his eyes when he realizes he has nothing left to sell." The jail's visiting room was a stark, suffocating rectangle of reinforced glass and the smell of industrial-grade floor wax. My name is Alara, and as I sat down on the bolted metal stool, I felt like I was back in the glass box. Only this time, the roles were reversed. I was the one with the power, and the man on the other side of the glass was the one trapped in a cage of his own making. My father looked like a ghost. The charismatic, silver-tongued man who could sell a minimalist lifestyle to a billionaire was gone. In his place was a trembling stranger with hollow eyes. He picked up the handset, and I did the same, the plastic cold against my ear. "Alara," he croaked. "Thank you for coming. I didn't think you would." I didn't come for you, James, I said, refusing to call him Dad. I came for the truth. You said you had a secret. Tell me or I'm hanging up. He leaned in, his breath fogging the glass. The Rose Trust, the money we took. You think we did it for the clothes and the trips. And we did at first, but there's a reason your mother was so desperate to keep you independent. There's a reason she wanted you in that academy in Switzerland. He paused, glancing nervously at the guard. You weren't supposed to be part of the brand, Ilara. When you were born, the doctors told us you had a heart murmur. Nothing fatal, but you weren't perfect. Your mother, she couldn't handle that. To her, a child with a flaw was a PR nightmare. She wanted to give you up for adoption the day we left the hospital. I felt the air leave my lungs. I had spent 11 years trying to be perfect for a woman who had rejected me the moment she saw my heartbeat on a monitor. Nana Rose found out, he continued, his voice shaking. She threatened to expose us. She said if we didn't raise you, she'd take the story to the papers. So we made a deal. She'd fund our lifestyle. She'd bankroll the perfect family image as long as you stayed with us. But the money came with a price. It was all tied to your well-being. That's why we intercepted the letters. That's why we kept you isolated. We had to make sure Nana never found out that we were just waiting. Waiting for what? I whispered. Waiting for her to die, he said, the words falling like lead. And waiting for you to turn 18 so we could settle the trust and be done with the Ilara project. But when the followers started dropping and the money got tight, your mother got impatient. The 30-day test wasn't just for the school. It was to see if you would disappear on your own. She hoped you'd run away. She hoped you'd become someone else's problem so we could claim the insurance and move on. The room seemed to spin. I wasn't just an asset, I was a hostage. My entire existence had been a long-term fraud, a performance kept alive by my grandmother's blackmail and my parents' greed. The $20 test wasn't a mistake, it was an attempt at an exit strategy. They hadn't just left me to starve, they had left me to vanish. Is that it? I asked, my voice surprisingly calm. Is that the big secret, that you never wanted me? Ilara, no, I cut him off. You don't get to explain. You traded my childhood for a follower count. You let me starve in a house worth millions because I was a flawed investment. You're not a father, James. You're a failed businessman. I hung up the phone. I didn't wait for him to cry or beg. I walked out of that jail and into the bright, biting cold of the afternoon. I went straight to Sarah's car. I didn't tell her what he said, not yet. I just asked her to drive me to the site of Nana Rose's cottage in the mountains. We drove for hours, leaving the gated communities and the glass houses far behind. When we reached the small, overgrown plot of land where the cottage once stood, I stepped out into the tall grass. The cottage was gone, sold and demolished by my parents years ago, but the garden Nana had planted was still there. Hard, stubborn roses were blooming through the weeds. I knelt down and dug my fingers into the dirt. It was real. It was honest. I pulled out my truth notebook. Day 28, I wrote, they didn't want a daughter, they wanted a masterpiece. But masterpieces are static. They don't breathe. They don't fight back. My mother thought a heart murmur made me weak. She didn't realize it just meant my heart had to beat harder than hers ever did. I looked at the gold compass necklace I had kept in my pocket. It was the only thing they had ever given me that had any beauty, even if it was a lie. I dug a small hole in the center of Nana's rose garden and dropped the necklace inside. I covered it with dirt, burying the last of their influence. I'm ready, I said, turning back to Sarah. Ready for what, sweetheart? To finish it, I said. The trial starts tomorrow. And I'm not going as a victim. I'm going as the person who closes the books. As the sun set over the mountains, I felt a strange sense of peace. The hunger was gone. The secrets were out. My parents had spent 11 years trying to write my story, but they had forgotten one thing. Eventually, the characters in a story grow up. And sometimes they take the pen. The sentencing hearing on day 30 felt like the final act of a play that had gone on for a lifetime. My name is Ilara, and as I stood in the hallway of the courthouse, I watched the morning light filter through the high windows, illuminating the dust. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of the light. I wasn't a girl in a glass box, waiting to be curated. I was the architect of the reality that was about to collapse on the two people who had given me life, but never a home. The courtroom was packed. Every seat was filled with journalists, former followers, and curious strangers who had been captivated by the story of the $20 daughter. When the doors opened and my parents were let in, the room went silent. They were in separate sets of handcuffs now. a physical manifestation of the rift that had formed between them. My father's attempt to blame my mother had failed, and my mother's attempt to claim maternal exhaustion had been laughed out of the preliminary hearings. I sat at the front, flanked by Sarah and Detective Vance. On the table before me sat the evidence notebook and the truth notebook. They were no longer just journals, they were the primary exhibits of the prosecution. Judge Miller, the woman with eyes like iron, took the bench. She didn't look at the lawyers first. She looked at me. Ilara, before I hand down the final sentence for the charges of child abandonment, financial fraud, and mail tampering, you have the right to provide a victim impact statement. Is there anything you wish to say? I stood up. I didn't feel small. I didn't feel like the girl who had cried over a jar of peanut butter. I walked to the podium, the clicking of my shoes on the marble floor the only sound in the room. I didn't look at my notes. I looked directly at the defense table. For 11 years, I began, my voice clear and resonating, I lived in a house where the walls were made of glass, but the windows were always closed. You taught me that my value was measured in likes, that my hunger was a discipline, and that my heart, the one you thought was flawed, was just a liability to your brand. You left me with $20 to see if I would disappear. You wanted to see if I was independent enough to stop needing you, so you could stop pretending to be parents. I saw my mother's lip tremble, but I didn't stop. You didn't just steal my food, you stole my grandmother's voice. You threw away her letters because they contained a love you couldn't monetize. You treated my life like a draft you could delete when the engagement dropped. I turned to the judge. Your Honor, they don't deserve my hate. Hate is an emotion you feel for someone who matters. What I feel is nothing. They are empty rooms in a house I've already moved out of. My only request is that you ensure they can never, ever use another human being as a prop again. They wanted an empty nest lifestyle. Let them find it in a cell where there are no cameras to watch them. The courtroom erupted in a low murmur. My father put his head on the table. My mother stared at the ceiling, her jaw locked. Judge Miller didn't wait. She leaned forward, her gavel gripped tightly. In my years on this bench, I have rarely seen a case of such calculated, cold-blooded neglect. You didn't just abandon a child, you attempted to socially and emotionally erase her for profit. Mr. and Mrs. Carter, I am sentencing you both to the maximum of 7 years in state prison, followed by 10 years of strict probation. All assets remaining in your name are hereby seized to pay restitution to the Rose Trust, which will remain under the guardianship of Sarah Jenkins until Ilara reaches adulthood. The sound of the gavel hitting the wood was final. Bang. As the bailiffs led them out, my mother turned back. For a second, I thought she would apologize. I thought I might see a flash of the woman who used to tuck my hair behind my ear, but she didn't. She looked at the cameras, her instinct for image still alive, and tried to fix her hair. She was a ghost of a person, a hollow shell of a mother. It's over, Sarah whispered, pulling me into a hug as the room began to clear. No, I said, looking at the truth notebook. The trial is over. My life is just beginning. We walked out of the courthouse and were immediately swarmed. Microphones were shoved in my face and cameras flashed like lightning. Ilara, how does it feel to be a millionaire? One reporter shouted, referring to the restored trust fund. Ilara, are you going to write a book? Will you start your own channel? Another asked. I stopped at the bottom of the steps. I looked at the sea of lenses, the same things that had defined my childhood and almost ended my life. I'm not a millionaire, I said, my voice carrying over the crowd. I'm a girl who finally has enough to eat, and I'm not starting a channel, I'm going to school. I'm going to play in the dirt. I'm going to be the high-maintenance child my parents were so afraid of. I'm going to be loud and messy and real. I didn't give them a pose, I didn't give them a smile. I walked to the car, and for the first time, I didn't look back to see if anyone was following. I didn't care about the engagement. I cared about the air in my lungs. That night, back at Sarah's house, we sat on the floor and ordered the biggest, most expensive pizza we could find. We didn't take a photo of it. We didn't post the unboxing. We just ate until we were full, laughing until our sides ached. But as I went to bed, I noticed a small, white envelope on my nightstand. It hadn't been there before. I opened it and found a single, handwritten note from Detective Vance. Ilara, it read, we finished the final audit of your father's encrypted files. There was one last video he never posted. It was from the day they left. You need to see it, not for the case, but for yourself. Password is home. I looked at my laptop. I knew that opening that file could bring back the ghosts. But I also knew that a warrior doesn't leave the battlefield until the last stone is turned. The file sat on my desktop like a ticking bomb. My name is Alara, and I had spent 30 days learning that my parents' love was a curated illusion, but this final video, was the one thing they hadn't meant for the world to see. I typed the password, home. The video opened with a shaky, handheld shot. It wasn't the stabilized, high-definition footage my father usually produced. It was raw. It was the morning they left. The camera was hidden on a bookshelf, capturing my parents in the foyer just as I had gone upstairs to pack my small backpack. My father was pacing. Janine, the card. I set the limit to $10, but what if she actually gets into trouble? What if something happens to the house? My mother didn't look up from her phone. She was adjusting her silk scarf in the mirror. James, stop. If she's comfortable, she won't grow. If she's hungry, she'll be forced to find the grit we've been talking about for our next seminar. It's perfect, it's authentic. But it's a lie, my father whispered. We're telling the world we're raising a leader, but we're just leaving her. My mother turned then, and for the first time, I saw the true face behind the brand. We aren't leaving her, James. We're liberating ourselves. Do you know how much it costs to keep her perfect image alive? The tutors, the heart specialists, the speech coaches? She's a sinkhole. This month isn't for her. It's for us to decide if we even want to come back to this life. She walked toward the door, then stopped. And if she fails, if she calls the police, then we have our narrative. We're the heartbroken parents of a troubled child who couldn't handle the freedom we gave her. Either way, we win. The video cut to black. I sat in the dark room, the glow of the screen reflecting in my eyes. It wasn't just neglect, it was a trap. They had set me up to fail so they could use my failure as their next big content pivot. If I had stayed, I was an asset. If I broke, I was a troubled child story they could sell for millions. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I felt a strange, cold sense of victory. They had thought they had a win-win scenario, but they had forgotten one thing: they had raised me. They had taught me how to document, how to record, and how to watch for the cracks in a story. They had sharpened the knife that I eventually used to cut them out of my life. Elora? Sarah's voice came from the hallway, followed by a soft knock. Everything okay? I closed the laptop. Yeah, I said, my voice steady. Everything is finally clear. The next morning, I took the laptop to Detective Vance. I didn't want the video for the court. The sentencing was already over. I wanted it for the public record. Post it, I said. Vance looked at me, surprised. Ilara, this is very personal. You don't have to show the world this side of them. They spent 11 years showing the world a version of me that didn't exist, I replied. It's only fair I show the world the version of them that does. When the exit video hit the internet, the final remnants of the Carter brand vanished. It wasn't just a scandal anymore. It became a cautionary tale taught in universities and discussed in Congress. Laws were drafted, the Alara Law, to protect children from being used as digital props. But as the world moved on to the next headline, I moved on to something much bigger, a normal life. I used a portion of the Rose Trust to buy back Nana's mountain land. We couldn't bring the old cottage back, but Sarah and I started drawing plans for a new house, one with big windows that actually opened, and a kitchen that would always smell like real food. On my 12th birthday, 6 months after the trial, there were no cameras, no sponsors, no unboxing of gifts. There was just a small cake, a few friends from my new school, and Sarah. I pulled out my truth notebook one last time. I flipped past the entries of hunger and betrayal, past the legal notes and the secrets. I went to a clean, white page at the very end. Day 180, I wrote. Today, I didn't think about the $20 bill once. I didn't check the balance on my card. I didn't look for a hidden camera. I ate 3 pieces of cake because I wanted to, not because I was storing calories for a storm. My heart murmur is still there, but it doesn't sound like a flaw anymore. It sounds like a drum. I closed the notebook and placed it in a box with Nana's letters. I wasn't going to throw it away. It was part of me. Kintu enus, it no longer defined me. Ready for the hike? Sarah asked, standing at the door with a backpack. Ready, I said. As we walked out into the crisp mountain air, I realized that my parents were right about one thing. I was independent, but not the kind of independent they wanted. I wasn't a self-contained asset. I was a girl who knew that true independence meant having the strength to trust people again. The $20 daughter was gone. In her place was Alara. And for the first time, she was exactly where she was supposed to be. 2 years have passed since the gavel fell, and the world has largely moved on to newer, louder scandals. But for me, time is no longer measured in days of survival. It is measured in seasons, in books read, and in the quiet growth of the rose bushes on a mountain slope. My name is Alara, and I am 13 years old. The glass box house was sold at auction a year ago. I heard that the new owners tore down the marble island and replaced the security cameras with bird feeders. Sometimes, I still see my parents' names in the news, short blurbs about their denied parole or their failed appeals. They are no longer influencers. They are inmates 40,293 and 40,294. In the end, they got exactly what they feared most. They became invisible. I recently received a letter from my father. It was written on yellowing prison paper, a far cry from the embossed stationery he used to use. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't ask if my heart was okay. He spent 3 pages explaining how his legacy was being unfairly tarnished and asking if I would use my trust fund to hire a new legal team. I didn't finish reading it. I didn't need to. I walked to the fireplace of our new home, the one Sarah and I built, and watched the paper curl into black ash. The fire didn't feel like a tragedy, it felt like a cleaning. "Alara, the cupcakes are ready?" Sarah called from the kitchen. I walked into the room, and for a moment I just stood in the doorway. The air smelled of vanilla and cinnamon. There were no ring lights, no tripods, and no one was waiting for the perfect shot before we could eat. We ate the cupcakes while they were still warm, the frosting getting on our fingers, laughing at a story Chloe was telling over FaceTime. I realized then that my parents' biggest lie wasn't that I was flawed. Their biggest lie was that life had to be curated to be beautiful. Before I went to bed, I took out my old blue notebook. I hadn't opened it in months. I turned to the very last page, underneath my entry from day 180. I picked up a pen and wrote one final thought. To whoever finds this notebook, you might be in your own version of a glass box right now. Someone might be telling you that you're an investment, a project, or a mistake. They might leave you with nothing but a $20 bill and a cold house. But remember this: hunger ends. Silence can be broken, and the people who try to edit your life are usually the ones who are most afraid of the truth. I am not the girl from the unboxing video. I am not the evidence in a crime. I am Alara, and I am finally, beautifully unscripted. I closed the notebook and placed it on the top shelf of my closet, right next to Nana Rose's letters. I turned off the light, not to save money, not because I was scared of the bill, but because I was ready to sleep. Outside, the mountain wind whispered through the trees, a sound that didn't need a caption. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for the next part of the story. I was living it.